Welcome to Ink and Evidence, where silence tells stories, and every clue brings us closer to the truth. From chilling crime cases to unsolved mysteries and secrets the world tried to forget, we uncover what lies beneath. If you dare to question, if you seek the truth, then you're exactly where you need to be. Tell us where you're watching this video from. Your feedback always inspires us. Stay tuned to solve the mystery, because the truth always leaves a trace.
Let's begin today's story. Murder at Elmsworth Village. Chapter 1. The bell that rang before dawn in Elmsworth Village. The snow had fallen all night over Elmsworth Village, softening every roof, every lane, every crooked fence into a pale and dreaming silence. By 4 o'clock, even the wind had grown tired, and the world lay still beneath a silver-blue darkness. Then the church bell rang. Once, a single, deep note rolled across the sleeping village, trembling through frosted windows and dying among the chimneys. In the little room above the bakery, Mr. Alastair Vale opened his eyes. He did not move at once, he listened. There was no second toll. Only the faint hiss of dying embers in the grate, and somewhere below, the patient ticking of flour sacks settling in the cold. Mr. Vale was not a policeman, though he had once been consulted by them. He was a small, neat gentleman with silver at his temples, careful hands, and eyes that noticed what others forgot to hide. By 4:30, 3 villagers had gathered outside St. Bartholomew's Church. Mrs. Pym, the baker's widow, wrapped in a shawl, Tom Rusk, the lamplighter, holding his lantern low, and Constable Hobb, red-faced from being pulled out of bed. "The bell rope is locked inside," said the constable. "Then someone was inside," murmured Mr. Vale. The church door stood shut. No footprints led to it, save their own freshly made marks in the snow. The constable unlocked the door, and the hinges gave a long, reluctant sigh. Inside, the church was colder than the graveyard. Their lantern light moved over empty pews, hymn books, stone angels, and finally the bell rope hanging motionless in the tower arch. At its base lay a black leather glove. Mr. Vale bent down. "Not the vicar S," whispered Mrs. Pym. "No," said Vale, "too fine." He lifted it gently. The glove was damp, not with snow, but with something that smelled faintly of metal and smoke. And on the rope above, tied in a delicate knot, was a single strand of blue silk. The man who heard too much. By breakfast, every cottage in Elmsworth knew of the bell. By noon, everyone had a theory. Old Mr. Bellamy claimed it was a warning. Miss Eliza Trent, who kept the post office, said the bell had rung once before, 40 years ago, on the morning a man vanished from the mill. The vicar, Reverend Ashcombe, looked paler than usual and insisted it must have been a prank. Mr. Vale said very little. He sat beside the fire in the Hare and Lantern, where frost whitened the windows and the room smelled of wet wool, pipe smoke, and spiced cider. Across from him sat Gideon Marsh, the church caretaker. "I locked the church at 9, said Gideon, "as I always do. And the tower, bolted from within. Did anyone ask after the bell?" Gideon's fingers tightened around his mug. Only Mr. Lorne. At the name, the inn fell quiet. Edwin Lorne had returned to Elmsworth 3 weeks earlier after 20 years away. He was wealthy now, they said, though no one knew from what. He had taken rooms at the old manor and walked each evening alone, always before dusk, always toward the churchyard. "Did he say why?" asked Vale. Gideon lowered his voice. He asked if the bell still rang clear. A log shifted in the hearth. Sparks rose like tiny, restless stars. "And what did you tell him?" "That it hadn't been rung in years, not since the crack." Mr. Vale looked up. "The bell is cracked. A hairline only, but enough. Reverend Ashcombe forbade its use." Vale was silent for a moment. A cracked bell, he thought, should not ring clear before dawn. Unless the sound did not come from the bell at all. The room at the manor. That afternoon, under a sky the color of pewter, Mr. Vale walked to Elmsworth Manor. The house stood beyond the yew trees, shuttered and grave, with snow pressed against its steps like folded linen. A maid admitted him with reluctance. Mr. Lorne's room was at the back. He was found seated by the window, dressed in a dark velvet robe, one hand resting on an unopened letter. His face was calm, almost listening, but he was dead. Constable Hobb crossed himself. "No wound," he muttered, "no sign of struggle." Mr. Vale moved quietly through the room. A fire had burned low. On the mantel stood a clock stopped at 10 minutes past 4. Beside it was a glass with amber liquid at the bottom. The air smelled faintly of bitter almonds, overlaid by lavender soap. On the desk lay a sheet of paper. One line had been written in a firm hand. "Before dawn, the village shall remember." Vale examined the unopened letter beneath Lorne's hand. It was addressed to Reverend Ashcombe. The seal had not been broken. "Poison?" asked the constable. "Perhaps. Suicide." Mr. Vale turned to the window. Outside, the snow lay smooth beneath the sill. No footprints, no ladder marks. "Perhaps not." He picked up the glass, held it to the light, then set it down with care. "Find Miss Trent," he said, "and bring me the vicar." The blue silk thread. By evening, Elmsworth seemed to hold its breath. Snow began again, finer now, whispering against the panes. In the vicarage drawing room, a coal fire glowed red as old wine. Reverend Ashcombe sat rigid in his chair. Miss Trent stood near the window, twisting a blue silk scarf in her hands. Mr. Vale noticed the color. "Mr. Lorne meant to send you a letter," he said to the vicar. Ashcombe's lips trembled. "I never received it." "No, death interrupted delivery." Miss Trent looked down. Vale continued gently. 40 years ago, a man vanished from the mill. His name was Samuel Vane. He was accused of stealing church funds, but he did not run away. The vicar closed his eyes. "Mr. Lorne discovered something, did he not? That Samuel Vane was innocent. That the money was taken by a young curate desperate to save his family from ruin." Ashcombe whispered, "I paid it back. But not before Vane disappeared." Miss Trent's voice was barely audible. "My father." The fire cracked softly. Vale turned to her. "You thought Lorne had come to expose the truth." "He promised to ring the bell before dawn," she said, "to make them all remember, to shame him." "And so you went to the church?" She nodded, tears bright on her lashes. "I only meant to stop him. I tied my scarf around the rope so it could not be pulled. I dropped my glove, but I never killed him." "No," said Vale, "you did not." The constable frowned. "Then who rang the bell?" Mr. Vale looked toward the vicar. The man who feared silence more than guilt. The sound that was not a bell. They gathered once more in St. Bartholomew's near midnight. The church was dark except for Mr. Vale's lantern, which cast tall shadows up the stone walls. Snow tapped softly at the stained glass. The bell rope hung still, innocent as a sleeping snake. Vale stood beneath it. "The bell could not have rung," he said. "It is cracked and the rope was bound, yet all heard a bell. What they heard was this." He raised a small brass handbell from beneath the altar cloth. Reverend Ashcombe staggered. "A funeral bell," said Vale, "kept here for house visits. Its note resembles the tower bell when heard through snow and sleep." Constable Hobb stared. "But why ring it?" "To create a time. To suggest Mr. Lorne died at dawn after some mysterious warning, but his clock was stopped by hand. The poison was taken earlier." Vale turned to the vicar. "You visited him at 10 last night. He showed you the letter. He had written the truth. You offered him a drink. Bitter almond cordial, perhaps, strong enough to hide what you added. Then you returned to the church before dawn, rang this handbell once from the porch, and let fear do the rest." Ashcombe's face had become very old. "I was forgiven," he whispered. "By God, perhaps, but not by men." Miss Trent stepped forward. "And my father." The vicar looked at her then, and the last of his strength seemed to leave him. "He felt," he said. "At the mill, we argued. I hid him in the old well." No one spoke. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering field and stone and sin with equal tenderness. Before the village woke. At dawn, the sky opened slowly over Elmsworth, pale gold behind the church spire. Reverend Ashcombe was taken away without resistance. Miss Trent stood alone in the churchyard, watching as men lifted stones near the old mill path. She did not weep. Some grief was too deep for tears and too tired for anger. Mr. Vale walked back through the village as shutters opened and smoke rose from chimneys. The world seemed unchanged, yet not untouched. Secrets had weight, and when lifted, they left marks behind. Mrs. Pym met him outside the bakery with a cup of tea. "Will the bell ring again?" she asked. Mr. Vale looked at St. Bartholomew's Tower, where the cracked bell hung silent in the morning light. "One day," he said, "when it can tell the truth." That evening, the village slept more gently. Snow lay soft along the lanes. Fires burned low. Somewhere a child dreamed of bells not as warnings, but as music carried over white fields. And in the quiet before dawn, nothing rang at all. Chapter 2. Fog along the cobblestones and secrets behind lace curtains. The fog arrived in Bellwether Lane before the lamps were lit, slipping between the houses as quietly as a hand beneath a door. It gathered along the cobblestones in pale folds, softened the iron railings, and turned every window into a small, golden secret. Behind the lace curtains of number 7, Miss Clara Wren sat beside the fire with a cup of untouched tea cooling in her hands. She was a tidy woman of 40, with watchful eyes and the habit of listening between sounds. Outside, a carriage passed slowly, its wheels muffled, its horse breathing steam into the damp evening. Then came the tap. 3 light knocks against the window glass. Clara turned at once. No one stood there. Only the fog pressed close, silver and patient, and beyond it the faint glow of the street lamp. Yet on the outer sill lay a white glove, neatly folded with a dark stain across the wrist. By 8 o'clock, Inspector Emile Caro had arrived. He was a small, elegant man with a careful mustache, polished shoes, and the serene expression of one who never allowed mystery to hurry him. He examined the glove, the window latch, the damp sill, and finally the curtains themselves. "These curtains," he murmured, "are always drawn." "Always by dusk," Clara said. "Mrs. Vale across the lane dislikes being seen." "Ah," said Caro softly, "people who dislike being seen often see a great deal." Across the fog-veiled lane, behind the lace curtains of number 12, a candle went out. The house across the lane. Mrs. Adelaide Vale was known in Bellwether Lane as a widow of delicate nerves and excellent china. She rarely stepped outdoors except for church and the greengrocer, yet nothing in the lane escaped her. Her lace curtains were famous, so thick they concealed her face, so thin they revealed everyone else's sins. Inspector Caro visited her after supper. Her parlor was warm and still, smelling of rose soap, coal smoke, and sugared biscuits. A clock ticked beneath a glass dome. On the mantel stood a portrait of a young officer with proud eyes and one gloved hand resting on a sword. Mrs. Vale received the inspector in black silk, her fingers folded too tightly in her lap. "A glove," she said. "How unpleasant. You did not see who left it." "Fog hides many things, Inspector, but it does not silence footsteps." Her gaze flickered toward the window. "I heard a man pause outside Miss Wren's house." "At what time?" "7:15. Caro looked at the clock under glass. "You are precise. I have little else to occupy me." He smiled faintly. "And did the man knock?" She hesitated. "No, I heard tapping glass." When Caro rose to leave, he paused beside the portrait. "Your husband?" "My son," she said, and something cold entered her voice. "Captain Julian Vale, lost at sea 8 years ago." "Lost," Caro repeated gently. "Presumed drowned." Outside, the fog brushed the windows. For an instant, Caro thought he saw movement beyond the lace, like a figure withdrawing into mist. At the door, Mrs. Vale said, "Inspector, if someone is playing tricks in this lane, you must stop them." "Madam," said Caro, "tricks are often confessions wearing masks." The man in the gray coat. At 9:30, a boy from the corner bakery brought news. A man in a gray coat had been seen near the alley behind number 7, carrying something wrapped in newspaper. He had limped slightly, as though one boot hurt him. Inspector Caro followed the alley by lantern light. The passage was narrow, lined with wet brick and old ash barrels. Fog rested there like breath caught in a throat. On the ground he found 3 marks, a narrow heel, a smear of coal dust, and a drop of wax the color of honey. At the alley's end stood the back entrance of Mr. Felix Marne's shop. Mr. Marne repaired clocks. He was a stooped man with clever fingers and a face that seemed always arranged to apologize. His workshop glowed with lamplight. Dozens of clocks ticked at different tempos, filling the room with soft, nervous life. "A man in a gray coat?" Caro asked. Mr. Marne blinked. "Many men own gray coats. And honey-colored sealing wax." The clockmaker's hands stilled. Caro noticed then the parcel on the workbench. It was wrapped in newspaper, tied with black thread. From one torn corner protruded a bit of white kid leather. "May I?" Marne swallowed. "It is not what you think." Inside lay the glove's companion, unstained, perfumed faintly with violet. "I found it," Marne whispered, "in the gutter, before or after the first glove was placed on Miss Wren's sill." The clocks ticked. The fog leaned at the windows. Marne lowered his eyes. "Before." Caro's voice remained kind. "Then we must ask why a quiet clockmaker lies about a lady's glove." The letter behind the curtain. Miss Clara Wren had not told the inspector everything. At 10 o'clock, when the lane was hushed and the fog lay thick as wool against the doors, Caro returned to number 7. Clara had lit only one lamp. Its glow trembled over the wallpaper and the half-drawn lace curtains. "You received a letter," he said. Clara's face lost color. From a drawer, she took an envelope sealed with honey-colored wax. Caro read the message by firelight. "At dusk, look behind the lace. The dead do not always sleep beneath water." There was no signature. "My sister was engaged to Captain Julian Vale," Clara whispered. "Before he vanished, she died waiting for him. And tonight, I thought someone meant to frighten Mrs. Vale, or me." Caro held the letter near the lamp. "The paper is expensive, the hand disguised, the wax from a clockmaker's bench, perhaps borrowed, perhaps planted." A coal broke softly in the grate. Across the lane, Mrs. Vale's upper window glowed. For a moment her curtains shifted, and Caro saw not one silhouette, but two. He stood very still. "Miss Wren," he said, "remain here, lock the door." The secret upstairs. Mrs. Vale's maid denied that anyone had entered the house. Mrs. Vale herself insisted she had been alone all evening. Inspector Caro asked to see the upper rooms. "No," she said too quickly. He looked at her with grave politeness. "Madam, secrets kept in warm rooms have a way of breathing." The locked room overlooked the lane. Its curtains were lace, its fire recently stirred. On a chair lay a gray coat. Beside the bed stood a pair of boots, one heel built higher than the other. And on the writing desk rested a navel ring, tarnished but unmistakable. Mrs. Vale gripped the doorframe. "My son came back," she said at last, "3 nights ago." From the shadows beside the wardrobe, a man stepped forward. Thin, pale, and bearded, he bore the ruin of illness and distance, yet the eyes matched the portrait below. Captain Julian Vale bowed his head. "I was not drowned," he said. "I deserted." The word fell gently, but it chilled the room. He had fled disgrace after losing regimental funds at cards. His mother had declared him dead to preserve the family name. Now, ruined and ill, he had returned, hoping to make peace with Clara's sister, not knowing she was gone. "The glove?" Caro asked. Julian closed his eyes. "I left it for Clara, a sign. Her sister wore white gloves the last evening I saw her." "But the stain?" Mrs. Vale spoke sharply. "Ink, nothing more." Caro lifted the glove from his pocket. "Not ink, laudanum and iron tonic, a medicine stain." He turned to Julian. "You are being dosed." Silence settled heavily. Then the maid began to weep. The fog lifts. Her name was Elsie Pike, and she had served Mrs. Vale for 11 years. She had polished the china, carried the coal, watched through lace curtains, and listened to grief harden into pride. "I only wanted him gone," Elsie whispered. "If he stayed, she would lose everything again, her name, her peace, the house." So she had sent the letter to Clara, hoping suspicion would fall outside the house. She had placed the stained glove on the sill. She had taken the second glove to Marne's shop, where she often delivered clocks for winding, and begged him to hide it. Mr. Marne, who loved her quietly and hopelessly, had obeyed. "And the medicine?" asked Caro. Elsie covered her face, only enough to keep him sleeping, not to kill. Mrs. Vale looked at her son then, truly looked, as if the fog inside her had finally thinned. Julian seemed less a scandal than a wounded man in need of firelight. Before dawn, the police carriage came without bells. No neighbors opened their doors, though every lace curtain in Bellwether Lane stirred. Inspector Caro stepped outside as morning softened the sky. The fog had begun to lift from the cobblestones, revealing each stone wet and bright beneath the lamps. Miss Clara Wren waited at her doorway, wrapped in a shawl. "Was there murder?" she asked. "No," said Caro. "Only fear dressed carefully and love made cowardly by shame." Across the lane, Julian Vale stood behind the glass, no longer hidden by lace. His mother's hand rested on his shoulder. Clara watched him in silence. The past could not be returned, nor the dead comforted by apologies, but truth, even late, had a warmth of its own. As the first milk cart rattled softly over the cobblestones, Inspector Caro walked away through the fading mist, leaving Bellwether Lane quieter than before and a little less blind. Chapter 3. The Quiet Outsider at the Blackthorn Inn. Snow began falling over Blackthorn Moor just after dusk, slow and soundless, as though the sky were emptying a feather pillow upon the world. By 8 o'clock, the road to Gravenhill had vanished beneath white drifts, and the Blackthorn Inn stood alone among the dark fields, its windows glowing amber through the storm. Inside, the fire burned deep in the hearth. Rain cloaks steamed on pegs. The old beams creaked softly above the taproom, and Mrs. Elspeth Crowe, the innkeeper, moved between tables with a tray of mulled wine and the quiet authority of a woman who had seen many winters. There were 7 guests that night. Mr. Ambrose Finch, a retired solicitor with a silver cane. Miss Lydia Penn, who painted landscapes no one ever bought. The Reverend Harrow, asleep with a book in his lap. 2 wool merchants stranded on their way north. A young maid named Bess, and the outsider. He sat near the window, where the cold pressed hardest against the glass. He was neither old nor young, with a dark coat brushed clean of snow, a leather satchel beside his chair, and hands folded as neatly as if he were waiting for judgment. He had given his name as Elias Rohn. No one knew him. That alone was enough to make the room uneasy. When Mrs. Crowe asked his business, he smiled faintly and said, "I am here to meet someone who may not wish to see me." At 9:30, the inn sign outside groaned in the wind. At 10, the candles guttered, and at 10:15, from the private dining room beyond the hall came the sound of breaking glass. Not loud, not violent, only a delicate shatter, like ice giving way beneath a cautious foot. Mrs. Crowe reached the room first. Mr. Ambrose Finch sat slumped at the table, his silver cane across his knees. A glass of port lay broken beside his hand. His face was pale, his eyes half open, and on the table before him rested a sealed envelope marked in black ink. For the man who lied. The room with the bolted door. The private dining room had been bolted from within. That was the first thing everyone agreed upon, which made it all the more troubling. The second thing was that Mr. Finch had entered alone, shortly after supper, to write letters by the fire. The third was that no one had seen anyone go in after him. The local constable could not come until morning. The snow had swallowed the road, and the telephone line, always uncertain, gave only a dead whisper. So the guests stood in the hall beneath the swinging lantern, looking at one another with the wary politeness of trapped strangers. It was Elias Rohn who stepped forward. "I was once an inquiry clerk," he said softly. "Not a detective, but I learned to notice what embarrassment tries to conceal." No one objected. Fear had made them practical. The room smelled of port, smoke, and bitter orange peel. The fire had burned low, leaving red veins among the coals. Mr. Finch's writing case lay open, but the paper inside was blank. The window was latched. The chimney was too narrow for even a child. Rohn examined the broken glass, then the sealed envelope, but did not open it. "Was he ill?" he asked. Mrs. Crowe shook her head. Stiff in the joints, proud in the temper, nothing more. Miss Lydia Penn stood near the doorway, her shawl drawn tight. Perhaps his heart failed. "Perhaps," said Rohn, "but hearts do not usually seal envelopes before failing." He lifted Mr. Finch's right hand and studied the fingertips. There was a faint dusting of black powder on the thumb. "Coal?" asked one merchant. "No," Rohn murmured, sealing ash. From the hearth came a small hiss as snow slid down the chimney and vanished in steam. The letter no one opened. The envelope remained on the mantel all night, watched by every pair of eyes. No one slept. The guests returned to the tap room where the fire was fed high and the storm folded itself around the inn. Snow tapped at the shutters. Somewhere in the kitchen, copper pans cooled with faint metallic sighs. Elias Rohn sat apart, the leather satchel at his feet. Mrs. Crowe watched him from behind the bar. "You knew him," she said at last. Rohn looked into the fire. "I knew of him." "That is not the same." "No, but sometimes it is close enough." Miss Penn lowered her cup. "What was in the letter?" "It has not been opened." "But you know." Rohn's face remained calm, though his eyes darkened. "I know what someone wished us to fear." The Reverend Harrow stirred awake and crossed himself. "This is wicked business." "Wickedness," Rohn said, "is rarely theatrical. It prefers habit, respectability, and warm rooms." He asked each person where they had been at 10:15. Mrs. Crowe had been in the kitchen warming cider. Bess had been polishing spoons in the scullery. The merchants had been playing cards. The Reverend claimed to have been asleep. Miss Penn had gone upstairs for a headache powder. "And you?" Mrs. Crowe asked. Rohn smiled faintly, watching the snow from the window. "A convenient occupation. Most honest ones are." Then Bess, the maid, began to cry. Not loudly, only a trembling breath quickly stifled. Rohn turned toward her. "You saw something," he said. She shook her head. "Not saw then, heard." The girl's eyes flickered toward the stairs. "A step," she whispered, "above the dining room just before the glass broke." The guest above. The room above the private dining room belonged to Miss Lydia Penn. She objected to the search with admirable dignity, but not enough force to prevent it. Her chamber was narrow, warmed by a small coal grate and scented faintly with turpentine, lavender water, and damp wool. Paintings leaned against the wall. Bleak hills, bare trees, quiet roads disappearing into fog. Elias Rohn noticed the floorboards first. One board near the bed had been lifted and replaced. Beside it lay a carpet bag with paint rags and a pair of gloves stained brown at the fingertips. "Paint," Miss Penn said quickly. Rohn touched the stain, then smelled it. Not entirely. Mrs. Crowe gasped when he lifted the floorboard. Beneath it was a narrow gap into the ceiling space below. Resting there, tied with thread, was a small brass funnel and a length of glass tubing. At its end clung a single dark drop. Miss Penn sat down, as if her knees had abandoned her. "It was not meant to kill him," she whispered. The room became very still. She told them then of her brother, once a junior clerk in Mr. Finch's office. Years before, he had been accused of stealing client funds. Ruined by scandal, he had walked into the river one November morning and never come home. "Mr. Finch knew he was innocent," she said. "He let another man pay for his own theft." "And tonight?" Rohn asked. "I wanted a confession. I sent the envelope. I meant to frighten him. The tube carried only vinegar and bitter herbs into his port, enough to make him think he was poisoned, enough to make him speak." "But he died," said Mrs. Crowe. Miss Penn bowed her head. "I did not know he would die." Rohn looked at the tubing, then at the gloves. "No," he said quietly, "because he did not drink from the glass. The man who lied." At dawn the storm eased. A pale light crept over the snowbound inn, gentle as milk poured across the moor. The guests gathered once more in the private dining room. Mr. Finch had been covered with a linen sheet. The broken glass still lay where it had fallen, glittering near the table leg. Elias Rohn opened the sealed envelope at last. Inside was a blank sheet. "A prop," he said, "useful only if one needs an audience to imagine guilt." Miss Penn stared at him, then who killed him? Rohn turned to the Reverend Harrow. The Reverend's face did not change, but his hand tightened around his prayer book. "You were not asleep," Rohn said. "Bess heard steps above, yes, but before that I heard a cane in the hall, Mr. Finch's cane. He walked out before Miss Penn's little theater began." "That is impossible," said one merchant. "No, it is inconvenient." Rohn lifted the silver cane. "The handle unscrews. Inside is a hollow chamber. Mr. Finch carried old secrets in elegant objects." He opened it. A folded confession slid out. The Reverend closed his eyes. "Mr. Finch was meeting someone here," Rohn continued. "Not Miss Penn, me. I came because he wrote to me. He wished to confess before dying. He named the man who shared his crime." Reverend Harrow whispered, "He promised never to speak. You stole the funds together. He ruined Miss Penn's brother to save himself, and you let him. Tonight, when he lost courage and decided to tell the truth, you followed him into the hall, gave him your sleeping draught under pretense of medicine, and helped him back inside." His heart stopped before the glass fell. Mrs. Crowe looked at the Reverend, as though seeing a stranger in borrowed black. Harrow sank into a chair. "I have preached forgiveness for 30 years, he said. "I did not know how to ask for it." The outsider leaves before morning. When the constable arrived late that morning, the moor lay bright and silent under snow. The Blackthorn Inn seemed almost peaceful again, smoke rising from its chimneys in soft gray ribbons. Miss Penn sat by the fire, pale but unguarded. She would answer for what she had done, though not for murder. The Reverend, wrapped in his own silence, was taken away without resistance. Mrs. Crowe found Elias Rohn at the door, his satchel in hand. "You never were an inquiry clerk," she said. "No," he replied. "Then what are you?" He looked out across the white road, someone who owed a dead man the truth. Mr. Finch's confession cleared the name of Miss Penn's brother, though too late for the river to return him. Still, the village would know. Names, like bells, could be cleaned if one was patient enough. Before stepping into the snow, Rohn turned back. "Keep your fires well fed, Mrs. Crowe. Inns here more than churches." She watched him walk away beneath the blackthorn trees, his figure becoming smaller, softer, until the white morning took him. By evening, the inn was warm again. Cups chimed gently. The fire whispered. Outside, snow slid from the roof in little sighs. And for many winters after, whenever a stranger sat quietly by the window, the guests of the Blackthorn Inn lowered their voices, not from fear, but from the memory that silence, too, could be listening. Chapter 4. The Body Beneath the Elm Tree on Harvest Morning. Harvest morning came softly to Alderwick, with gold mist lying low over the fields and the smell of cut wheat drifting through the open cottage windows. The village had risen before dawn, not with haste, but with that quiet pleasure known only at the end of a good season. Ovens warmed, horses stamped in their stalls. Somewhere a kettle sang. At the edge of the common stood the old elm tree, broad and solemn, its leaves already touched with amber. Every year, the first sheaf of wheat was placed beneath it before the harvest procession began. It was an old custom, older than the church clock and perhaps older than the church itself. But that year, when little Annie Moss carried the ribbon sheaf across the dew-bright grass, she stopped before the elm and screamed. A man lay beneath the branches. He was on his back, dressed in a dark Sunday coat, though it was barely 6 in the morning. His hat rested neatly beside him. One hand was closed around a stalk of wheat. His face was calm, almost peaceful, as if he had fallen asleep listening to the birds. By the time Inspector Lucian Bell arrived from Market Swithin, half the village had gathered at a respectful distance. He was a compact gentleman with careful gloves, bright eyes, and a voice that never rose above a fireside murmur. He looked at the body, then at the villagers, and lastly at the elm. "Who is he?" asked. Mrs. Thorne, the baker's wife, crossed herself. "Mr. Silas Morrow." A silence followed the name. "Morrow Farm," said the vicar quietly, "the largest holding in Alderwick." Inspector Bell knelt beside the body. There was no blood, no torn clothing, no mud upon the shoes, though the grass around him shone wet with dew. "How curious," Bell said softly. "A man beneath a tree on harvest morning, yet not a blade of grass crushed by his arrival." The first chief. Silas Morrow had not been loved, though nearly everyone had needed him. He owned fields, cottages, debts, and secrets with equal firmness. He lent money in winter and collected it after harvest, always with a polite smile that made refusal seem sinful. His sister, Miss Agnes Morrow, arrived wrapped in black wool despite the mild morning. She looked not at the body but at the wheat stalk in his hand. "That is from the south field," she said. Inspector Bell turned. "You are certain?" "My brother had the best wheat in the parish. I know its color." The stalk was unusually pale, almost silver at the beard. Bell placed it carefully in his notebook. The village doctor, old Dr. Hale, examined Morrow beneath the elm while the harvest wagons waited in the lane, their wheels garlanded with flowers. The cheerful ribbons looked suddenly foolish in the morning light. "Heart failure, perhaps," Dr. Hale said at last. "No wound that I can find." "Men with failed hearts," Bell replied, "do not often arrange their hats so tidily." Near the tree, a strip of red thread clung to the bark. Bell removed it with tweezers. On the ground, close to a root, he found a small smear of candle wax, yellow and faintly scented with beeswax. The vicar noticed his interest. "We held vigil last night," Reverend Pike said. "For the harvest blessing, candles everywhere, people came and went." "Did Mr. Morrow attend?" The vicar hesitated. No, he considered village customs sentimental. "And yet," Bell said, looking down at the dead man, "the village custom has claimed him." Across the common, someone sobbed. It was not Miss Morrow. It was Clara Vale, the schoolmistress, pale as linen, gripping the handle of her basket as though it alone held her upright. The schoolmistress's basket. Clara Vale lived in a small cottage behind the schoolhouse, where late roses climbed the wall and the windows always glowed warm by dusk. Inspector Bell found her there after the body had been carried away. Her parlor smelled of lavender, ink, and fresh bread. A fire, unnecessary but comforting, burned low in the grate. On the table lay exercise books, a teacup, and a basket covered with a checked cloth. "You knew Mr. Morrow," Bell said. "Everyone knew him." "But you wept." She lowered her eyes. "I am sorry for death, Inspector, even when the man was hard." Bell studied the basket. Beneath the cloth were 3 small loaves, still warm, and a folded square of linen embroidered with red thread. "Your work." "My mother S. I meant what phrase?" He touched the thread at the edge. It matched the strand found on the elm. Clara saw his glance. Many women in Alderwick use red cotton. "Indeed, but not all leave it where a man dies." Her face tightened, not with guilt but with memory. "Mr. Morrow came here yesterday evening." "Why?" "He wanted the school closed." The fire gave a soft sigh. "He said the land belonged to him," she continued. "He had papers. He meant to turn the building into storage after harvest." "And you argued?" "I begged." "Did he relent?" Clara looked toward the window, where children's voices drifted faintly from the lane. Mr. Morrow did not understand begging unless it was his own. When Bell rose to leave, he noticed flour on the doorstep, pale against the stone. Not ordinary dust, but a clean handprint, as though someone had steadied themselves there after carrying bread. The south field. By afternoon, clouds gathered like wool over the hills, and the harvest celebration became a quieter thing. No music played. The wagons stood idle. Men spoke in low voices beside hedges, while women brought pies and cider to tables no one approached. Inspector Bell walked to the south field. The wheat there stood half-cut, shining in long bands under the dimming sky. At the far edge, near a broken stile, the stalks were trampled in a narrow path. Bell followed it to an old thrashing shed. Inside, the air was warm and dry, smelling of straw, dust, and mice. On the floor lay more beeswax, 3 drops hardened near a lantern hook. Beside them was a dark stain on the boards, scrubbed but not erased. A voice spoke behind him. "You notice too much, Inspector." It was Thomas Reed, Morrow's tenant farmer, a broad man with tired shoulders and gentle, guarded eyes. Bell smiled. "And you arrived too quietly." Reed looked at the stain. "He came here last night." "Morrow?" "Yes, to collect rent I had not yet earned. He said he would turn my wife and children out by Michaelmas." "And then?" "I struck him," Reed's voice broke. "Only once. He fell against the grain bin. I thought he was dead." "But he was not." Reed shook his head. "He groaned when I ran, I swear it." Bell believed the fear in his voice, but fear was not innocence. Outside, wind moved through the wheat like whispered applause. "Who else knew?" "My wife and Miss Agnes." "His sister?" "She came to the shed after. I saw her lantern." "The sister in black." Miss Agnes Morrow received Inspector Bell in the farmhouse dining room, where silver gleamed on the sideboard and the curtains were drawn against the lowering evening. A coal fire burned with perfect discipline. Nothing in the room seemed touched by grief except the untouched place at the head of the table. "My brother was a difficult man," Agnes said. "That does not make every debtor a murderer." "No," Bell replied, "but it makes every kindness suspicious." She looked at him sharply. He placed the pale wheat stalk on the table. This came from the south field where your brother was injured, yet his body was found under the elm with dry shoes unmarked by dew. Someone moved him before dawn. Agnes did not answer. You found him in the shed, Bell continued. Alive but wounded, your brother would have ruined Reed, closed the school, and sold half the village by winter. Perhaps you thought death would be kinder than another season under his hand. Her mouth trembled once. Then Clara Vale stepped in from the hall. No, Clara said, she did not kill him. Agnes closed her eyes. Clara stood very still. I followed him after he left my cottage. I saw Mr. Reed strike him. After Reed ran, Mr. Morrow laughed. Even hurt, he laughed. He said he would have us all begging by Christmas. Belle's voice softened. What did you do? I left him. Tears filled her eyes. Alive, I left him alive. Agnes whispered, I came after. I found Silas trying to rise. He begged me to help him. And did you? I helped him to the elm. Her face had gone gray. He wanted the village to find him there to shame them. He said if he died, his will would punish everyone. Belle leaned forward, but he did not die beneath the elm. The will at dawn. The truth lay not in rage, but in paper. In Silas Morrow's desk, hidden beneath account books, Inspector Bell found 2 wills. The first gave everything to his sister. The second, dated the previous day, left the farms to distant cousins and ordered the schoolhouse demolished. But the second will lacked a witness. At dawn, Bell said, gathered with them in the farmhouse parlor, Mr. Morrow intended to sign it before the harvest began. He carried the wheat as a symbol, the elm as his stage, and cruelty as his last harvest. Dr. Hale stood near the fire, his old hands folded over his bag. Bell turned to him. You were called before dawn, were you not? The doctor's face sagged. Miss Agnes fetched you when her brother collapsed beneath the elm. You found him alive. You knew what the new will meant. You also knew his heart was weak. Dr. Hale looked into the coals. I gave him drops. Too many. He had bled inside from the fall. He was suffering. And the village would suffer after him. The doctor's eyes filled. I delivered half this village into the world. I could not watch him turn them out of it. No one spoke for a long while. Outside, the first rain began, soft against the windows, washing the dust from the harvest road. When morning returned. By the next morning, the rain had passed, and Alderwick smelled of wet earth, bread, and clean straw. The elm tree stood bright beneath the washed sky. Its leaves moved gently, as if nothing grave had ever rested in its shade. Dr. Hale went with the constable quietly. Thomas Reed confessed to the blow, Clara to her silence, and Agnes to moving her brother. None were innocent, and yet none had begun the day intending death. Inspector Bell watched the harvest procession resume at last. Little Annie Moss placed the first sheaf beneath the elm with trembling hands. This time no one screamed. The villagers bowed their heads, not for Silas Morrow, perhaps, but for the strange mercy of truth. Clara Vale stood beside the schoolchildren. Miss Agnes Morrow stood alone until Clara took her hand. Bell smiled faintly. In the evening, lamps glowed in cottage windows, and smoke rose blue from chimneys. The fields rested, shorn and golden. Somewhere a fiddle began to play, softly at first, then warmer, like courage returning by candlelight. And beneath the elm tree, the wheat lay still, no longer a clue but an offering. Chapter 5. Tea rooms, parish records, and whispers by the riverbank. The rain had ended before dusk, leaving the village of Marrowdean washed and shining beneath a sky the color of old pewter. Along the high street, lamplight softened the puddles, and the little tea rooms beside the apothecary glowed as warmly as a lantern cupped between 2 hands. Inside, Miss Beatrice Lyle poured Darjeeling into blue china cups while the fire whispered in the grate. Her tea rooms were famous for seed cake, discretion, and the sort of silence in which secrets felt safe enough to breathe. At the corner table sat Mr. Percival Quill, the parish clerk, with his ledger beside him and spectacles low on his nose. Across from him, Miss Nora Vane, who embroidered altar cloths and heard more confessions than the vicar, stirred her tea without drinking. Then the bell above the door gave a small silver sound. A stranger entered. He was short, elegant, and precise, with a polished cane and eyes that seemed to notice the room before the room noticed him. Mr. Augustin Bell, he said, removing his gloves. I was told one might learn the truth of Marowdine here if one ordered the lemon cake. Miss Lyle smiled. One might learn gossip. Madam, said Bell gently, gossip is merely truth before it is dressed for church. He had come because a body had been found that morning by the riverbank. Not drowned, though wet at the cuffs. Not robbed, though his purse remained. A man named Edwin Pike, known to some as a genealogist and to others as a troublemaker with ink on his fingers. In his pocket lay a torn page from the parish records. On it was written one line in faded brown script. The child was not buried under his name. The ledger in the vestry. St. Jude's Church stood above the river, its stones dark from rain, its yew trees still dripping softly in the evening air. Mr. Bell walked there with the vicar, Reverend Tomlin, who smelled faintly of wool, candle smoke, and anxiety. The parish records are kept in the vestry, the vicar said, locked always. And yet Mr. Pike possessed a page. A copy, perhaps. Bell did not answer. The vestry was narrow and cold, lit by a single lamp. Shelves climbed the walls, heavy with registers of births, marriages, and burials. The oldest book lay open on the table, its leather cracked like dry earth. A page had been cut out with care. Not torn, Bell murmured, removed by someone with patience. The missing entry belonged to the year 1869. Bell examined the pages before and after. One recorded the baptism of Alice Fenwick, daughter of a miller. The next recorded the burial of an unnamed infant found by the river after winter floods. Reverend Tomlin stood very still. You recognize the names around it, Bell said. The vicar lowered his voice. The Fenwicks owned half the village once. And now, only Mrs. Rosamond Fenwick remains. She lives at Greywillow House. Bell closed the book softly. Does she take tea? Every Thursday at Miss Lyle's. The lamp hissed. Beyond the small window, the river moved through darkness, making the gentle, secretive sound of silk drawn over stone. Bell touched the cut edge of the page. The dead are often quiet, he said, but records, Reverend, records have a dreadful habit of speaking. The widow at Greywillow House. Greywillow House stood behind iron gates and winter roses, overlooking the bend in the river. Though spring had begun, the rooms inside felt preserved in late November, dim, orderly, and scented with lavender polish. Mrs. Rosamond Fenwick received Bell beside a coal fire wrapped in dove-gray shawls. Her face was fine-boned, her hair white, her hands steady upon the arms of her chair. Mr. Pike visited you, Bell said. Many people visit old women when they want something. What did he want? Money. For silence. Her eyes moved to the fire. For a theory. Bell waited. He claimed that my elder brother, Edmund, did not die in infancy, that another child was buried in his place, and Edmund was sent away. And why would your family do that? Mrs. Fenwick smiled without warmth. Families do many things to preserve inheritance. On the mantel stood a silver frame holding a faded photograph. 2 children beside a river, a girl with ribboned hair and a small boy holding a toy boat. Bell leaned closer. The boy's left hand was gloved. An injury? He asked. My brother was born with 2 fingers joined, she said. The glove spared questions. Yet the burial record says the infant was unnamed. It was a cruel winter. Records were often poor. Bell turned from the photograph. Mr. Pike was found with river mud only on his cuffs, not on his shoes, curious for a man discovered on the bank. Mrs. Fenwick's expression did not change. Then perhaps he was carried. Perhaps, said Bell, or perhaps he knelt to listen. As he left, a maid in a black dress watched from the passage, her eyes reddened. In her hand she held a tea tray bearing 2 cups, though Mrs. Fenwick had taken no guest. Whispers by the riverbank. By nightfall, mist had returned to the water meadows. It curled low over the reeds and silvered the stones where Edwin Pike had been found. Inspector Hale of the county police held the lantern while Bell crouched near the river. Nothing here, Hale said, only mud and weeds. Nothing is a boast made by the impatient. Bell found impressions in the soft bank, 1 narrow boot, 1 heavier heel, and the round mark of a cane. Close to the reeds lay a damp thread of green wool, caught on a thorn. He lifted it carefully. "Green wool," Hale said. "Half the village wears green wool. But not half the village has lost a thread beside a dead man." They followed the path to the old boathouse, abandoned since the mill closed. Inside, the air smelled of rot, river water, and cold wood. On the floor stood a kettle, a spirit lamp, and 2 china cups wrapped in cloth from Miss Lyle's tea rooms. One cup was cracked. Belle sniffed it, bitter almonds faint beneath the tannin. "Poison?" Hale asked. A suggestion of poison, enough to frighten a man already afraid. In the corner lay Edwin Pike's satchel. Inside were copied records, family trees, and a note written in a trembling hand. "Ask the woman who serves tea at Greywillow." Belle straightened. "Not the widow," he murmured, "the maid." At that moment, outside in the mist, someone whispered his name. When Hale raised the lantern, the riverbank was empty. The woman who served tea. The maid's name was Martha Reed, though in the old records her family had once been called Fenwick. She lived in a cottage near the mill ruins, where smoke rose thinly from the chimney and the windows were curtained in plain muslin. Miss Lyle was there when Belle arrived, sitting close to the fire, holding Martha's hand. "So," Belle said gently, "the tea rooms do more than serve cake." Miss Lyle looked up. "They serve frightened women, too." Martha's face was pale, but her voice was clear. "Mr. Pike came to me because my grandmother kept letters. She had been nursemaid at Greywillow. She knew the infant buried in 1869 was not Edmund Fenwick." "Who was it?" "My grandmother's child," Martha whispered. "Taken when it died, used to hide the Fenwick heir's disappearance. And Edmund, sent abroad. Later he returned under another name. He married. I am his granddaughter." The room seemed to grow quieter. Belle understood then. Martha was not merely a servant, she was blood, perhaps rightful blood. "Mr. Pike planned to expose this," he said. "Yes, but I begged him not to. Mrs. Fenwick is old. The house is already ruin enough." "And yet Pike died." Martha shook her head. "I met him at the boathouse. I gave him tea. He became agitated, said someone had followed him. He ran toward the river." "With whom?" She looked toward Miss Lyle. Miss Lyle said softly, "With Mr. Quill, the parish clerk, the man with the ledger." They found Percival Quill in the tea rooms after closing, seated at his usual table, the parish ledger before him as though it were a Bible. Rain had begun again, tapping lightly at the panes. The fire had sunk low, turning the room amber and shadowed. "You cut the page," Belle said. Quill removed his spectacles. "I preserved it." "You stole it." "I protected Marrodine from scandal." Belle placed the green wool thread on the table. Quill's waistcoat was green, the edge near the pocket frayed. "Mr. Pike discovered the truth. Martha Reed had a claim. Mrs. Fenwick might have lost Greywillow. And you, Mr. Quill, keeper of records, would be exposed as the man who sold copies to whoever paid." Quill's mouth tightened. Pike was reckless. "You followed him to the boathouse. He had taken tea with Martha. You added bitter almond essence to his cup, not enough to kill, only to make him think poison had touched his lips. You meant to frighten him into surrendering his papers." "He stumbled," Quill whispered. "He ran into the mist. I caught his sleeve by the river. He pulled away and struck his head on the stone. And then I placed him where they found him. I took the page. I thought secrets belonged buried." Miss Lyle stood behind the counter, her face grave in the firelight. "No," she said, "secrets belong to those who suffered them." Quill bowed his head, and in that small movement all his dignity seemed to fold like damp paper. "The river remembers." By morning, the rain had polished Marrodine until every roof, leaf, and cobblestone shone beneath a tender gray light. The river moved quietly past the churchyard, carrying petals, reeds, and old whispers toward the sea. Percival Quill was taken away before breakfast. No crowd gathered, though curtains stirred along the high street. Mrs. Fenwick sent for Martha Reed before noon, and the 2 women sat together at Greywillow House beside the fire, with the old letters spread between them like fragile bridges. Miss Lyle reopened the tea rooms at 3. The lamps glowed warmly. Scones cooled beneath linen. Reverend Tomlin came in for black tea, and Inspector Hale for something stronger, though he called it medicinal. Mr. Augustin Bell took the corner table once used by Edwin Pike. Before him sat lemon cake and a cup of Darjeeling, perfectly steeped. Miss Lyle poured the tea. "Will the village forgive?" she asked. Belle looked toward the window, where the river flashed silver between the houses. "Villages do not forgive quickly," he said, "but they remember beautifully once taught how." At dusk, Martha passed the tea room with Mrs. Fenwick's shawl around her shoulders. No one spoke, yet Miss Lyle touched the window lightly and Martha smiled. Outside, the rain ceased. Inside, cups chimed softly, the fire breathed low, and Marrodine settled into evening, no longer free of secrets, but perhaps a little less afraid of the truth beneath them. Chapter 6. The Watchmaker's Ledger and the Locked Greenhouse Door. The first frost of November silvered the roofs of Renford before the church clock struck 7. Chimneys breathed into the pale morning, and the village moved slowly, as though reluctant to disturb the cold. Behind the high windows of Mr. Haldon's watchmaker's shop, a dozen clocks ticked in delicate disagreement. By habit, Miss Elsie Marr brought him tea each morning from the bakery. She found the front door unlatched, the bell above it silent, and the workshop lit by one dying lamp. Mr. Tobias Haldon sat at his bench, spectacles low on his nose, one hand resting beside an open ledger. He looked almost asleep among springs, gears, and tiny golden screws, but the tea cooled in Elsie's trembling hands before she understood. The old watchmaker was dead. Inspector Armand Vale arrived before 8, elegant in a dark overcoat, his gloves buttoned neatly at the wrist. He stood for some time without speaking, listening to the clocks. Their ticking filled the room like cautious rain. "Heart failure?" asked Constable Webb. "Perhaps," Vale murmured, "but a room full of timepieces makes Lies very nervous." The ledger before Haldon was open to the final page. Across it, in a hand not quite steady, someone had written, "The debt blooms where no door opens." Beside the words lay a brass greenhouse key. Yet when Constable Webb hurried to Haldon's garden, he found the greenhouse door locked from the inside. The ledger of small debts. Tobias Haldon had repaired every clock in Renford for 40 years. He was mild, stooped, and almost invisible, yet his ledger told a different story. Between entries for watch chains and mantle repairs were small private notes. Names, dates, sums borrowed, favors owed, promises delayed. Inspector Vale turned the pages beside the fire, while frost melted slowly from the window panes. "Not merely accounts," he said, "confessions in arithmetic." There was Mrs. Pell, the grocer's wife, who had pawned her mother's brooch and bought it back in secret. There was Reverend Sloane, who owed money from a winter long past. There was Mr. Gideon Fane, owner of the manor greenhouse, marked beside a line in red ink, "Orchids, inheritance, false receipt." "Fane," said Constable Webb, "the gentleman up at Ashcombe House." "The same gentleman," Vale replied, "whose rare orchids are admired by everyone except those who pay his gardeners." A drawer in the bench had been forced, but clumsily. Nothing valuable appeared missing. On the floor beneath the stool, Vale found a faint crescent of green wax. He lifted it carefully. "Sealing wax?" asked Webb. "No, grafting wax, used by gardeners." The constable frowned. "Then the key points to Fane." "Keys often point," said Vale softly. "They do not always tell us who held them." Outside, the village bell rang 9. Every clock in the shop answered differently, except one small silver carriage clock on the shelf. It had stopped at 3 minutes past midnight. The greenhouse at Ashcombe House. Ashcombe House stood beyond the village green, wrapped in leafless trees and cold mist. Its greenhouse stretched along the south wall, glass panes glittering beneath frost like a row of blind eyes. Mr. Gideon Fane met them in the hall, tall, handsome, and irritated by inconvenience. His sister, Miss Helena Fane, stood near the fire, pale and composed, a book unopened in her hands. "I knew Haldon," Gideon said. "Everyone knew Haldon. I did not kill him." "No one has accused you," Vale replied. "You have brought a constable." Constables are comforting at large houses. The greenhouse door remained locked from within. Through the misted glass they could see orchids hanging in warm, damp air, their petals ghostly purple and white. A gardener broke the lower pane, reached through, and unlatched the door. Inside, heat folded around them. The air smelled of wet soil, leaves, and something sweetly decaying. Beneath a bench of orchids lay a second ledger page, torn from Haldon's book. Vale read the words aloud. paid in full when the white flower opens. Miss Helena's lips parted. On the floor near the door was a trail of soil, though no footprints crossed the frost outside. A lantern hung cold from a hook. Beneath it, Vale found another clue, a watch glass cracked in two. He looked at Gideon Fane's waistcoat. The chain was there, but the watch was missing. "You lost something," Vale said. Fane's expression hardened. "A trifle." "Trifles," said Vale, "are the crumbs by which truth is fed." The white orchid. At noon, snow began to fall in soft, uncertain flakes. Inspector Vale returned to the watchmaker's shop, where Miss Elsie Marr sat wrapped in a shawl, waiting to be useful. "Mr. Haldon was kind to you?" he asked. "He taught me numbers," she said. "After my father died, he said everyone should know what is owed to them." "And did he fear anyone?" Elsie looked toward the ledger. He feared what he had written. She told him of the white orchid. Years ago, Mr. Fane's father had promised a rare plant to his daughter Helena, along with a portion of money in trust. But after the old man's death, Gideon claimed the orchid had died and the money had been spent maintaining the estate. Haldon, who had repaired the manor clocks that winter, had witnessed a receipt proving the orchid had been sold abroad for a fortune. "Why keep silent?" Vale asked. "Mr. Haldon owed Gideon money then. Later he paid it back, but shame has a long shadow." Elsie lowered her voice. "Last night Miss Helena came here." Vale's gaze sharpened. "She was crying. I saw her through the window. Mr. Haldon gave her something from the ledger." "Which page?" "I could not see." As she spoke, the stopped carriage clock chimed once, suddenly and faintly. Vale crossed to it. Behind the clock, tucked beneath the case, was a pressed white orchid petal, brittle as old paper. He smiled sadly. "The flower has been dead a long time," he murmured, "but someone was waiting for it to bloom." The sister by the fire. Miss Helena Fane received Inspector Vale in the small morning room as afternoon darkened into blue. Snow whispered against the windows. The firelight touched her face but did not warm it. "You went to Mr. Haldon last night," Vale said. "Yes." "Why?" "To ask for proof." "Of your brother's theft." She looked into the flames. "Of my father's promise. I had begun to think I had imagined kindness." Vale placed the pressed petal on the table. Helena touched it with trembling fingers. "My father bred that orchid for me. Gideon sold it. He sold everything that was mine." "And Mr. Haldon gave you the page?" She nodded. "He said he would speak today. He said debts like clocks must one day strike." "Did your brother know?" Helena closed her eyes. "He followed me. I heard him outside the shop." At that moment, Gideon entered without knocking. "This is absurd," he said. "My sister is overwrought. Haldon was an old fool with a ledger full of village nonsense." Vale watched him carefully. "Where is your watch, Mr. Fane?" Gideon smiled thinly. "Mislaid." "Then you will be relieved to no part of it was found in your greenhouse." For a moment, the room held only the sigh of the fire. Then Helena whispered, "Gideon, what did you do?" He looked not at his sister, but at the snow beyond the glass. "I went to frighten him," he said, "nothing more." The door that locked itself. By lamplight, Inspector Vale gathered them in the greenhouse. Gideon, Helena, Elsie, Constable Webb, and old Mrs. Crane, the housekeeper. The glass roof above them was blurred with snow, and the orchids hung like pale faces in the warm gloom. The locked door, Vale said, was meant to turn suspicion into theater. A key on a dead man's desk, a greenhouse sealed from within, a message about blooming debts. Very picturesque, very foolish. He walked to the door and lifted the latch. "This door can be locked from outside if one pulls the inner bolt with wire through the broken corner of the frame. There are scratches here." Gideon's face was gray. But Mr. Fane did not kill Haldon in the greenhouse. He followed Helena to the shop, argued with Haldon, and struck the bench. His watch glass broke. He stole the ledger page and later hid it here to suggest some dreadful appointment among the orchids. "So he killed him," Webb said. "No," Vale turned. Mrs. Crane had gone very still. "Mr. Haldon was alive when Gideon left. Frightened, yes, but alive. Then came someone who had served Ashcombe House for 30 years. Someone who knew the orchid had been sold, who knew Miss Helena had been wronged, and who feared the proof would destroy what remained of the family. Mrs. Crane's mouth trembled. "You gave Mr. Haldon his nightly cordial," Vale said gently, "as you had done when he visited the manor years ago. Only last night you added foxglove from the greenhouse border." Helena covered her face. Mrs. Crane whispered, "I meant to spare her. Scandal would finish this house." "No," said Vale, "truth would have freed her." The last clock. Morning came white and hushed over Renford. Snow softened the roofs, the hedges, the churchyard stones. In the watchmaker's shop, the clocks were wound one by one, and their ticking returned like small, patient hearts. Mrs. Crane confessed before the constable took her away. Gideon Fane, ruined by his own vanity, said nothing. Helena stood at the greenhouse door for a long time, looking at the orchids that had survived neglect, lies, and winter. By noon, Inspector Vale closed Tobias Haldon's ledger. Inside it lay the torn page restored to its place, and beside it the pressed white petal. Miss Elsie Marr took the brass key from the desk. "What will become of the shop?" she asked. Vale looked around at the clocks, the tools, the soft dust of a life spent measuring minutes for others. "That depends," he said. "Can you wind them?" Elsie smiled through tears. "Every one." That evening, lamps glowed behind the shop windows. Snow fell quietly outside, and villagers paused to hear the clocks strike 6 in a clear, imperfect chorus. At Ashcombe House, Helena opened the greenhouse door and left it unlocked. And somewhere beneath glass, among damp leaves and winter breath, a small white orchid bud began at last to open. Chapter 7. A confession heard through the chapel wall. Snow had begun before evening prayers and continued long after the last candle was snuffed in St. Anselm's chapel. It fell upon the little village of Briarcombe with such tenderness that even the gravestones seemed less severe beneath their white coverings. The lanes were silent. The cottages glowed softly behind frost-rimmed windows. Somewhere a dog barked once, then thought better of it. Inside the chapel, Miss Eleanor Voss remained behind to mend the altar cloth. She was the vicar's niece, a woman of calm habits and careful hands, accustomed to the quiet company of old stone, fading flowers, and the faint smell of beeswax. The vestry fire had nearly died, leaving only a red heart among the ashes. Beyond the wall, in the small confession room seldom used since the old Catholic days, the chapel held its breath. Then she heard a voice. Low, broken male. "I did not mean for him to die." Eleanor's needles stopped in the cloth. The voice came through the wall, muffled by age and plaster. "I took the letter, I burned the seal. God forgive me, I buried him beneath the yew." A floorboard creaked. Eleanor rose slowly, the altar cloth slipping from her lap. She crossed to the vestry door, opened it, and looked into the chapel. Moonlight lay pale across the pews. Snow whispered against the windows. No one was there. When she reached the confession room, it was empty. But on the kneeler lay a scrap of charred paper, still smelling faintly of smoke and lavender. The listener in the vestry. Inspector Matthias Cal arrived from Winterford the next morning, wrapped in a dark wool coat and wearing the patient expression of a man who trusted silence more than answers. He listened to Eleanor's account beside the vestry fire while the vicar, Reverend Voss, stood with both hands folded over his prayer book. "A confession heard through a wall," Cal said gently, "and no confessor found." "I know what I heard," Eleanor replied. "I do not doubt your ears, Miss Voss. I merely distrust walls." The chapel was old, older than many records in the parish chest. Its stones held cold even at noon. Inspector Cal studied the confession room, the vestry, the thin crack along the plaster, and the kneeler where the burnt scrap had been found. On the fragment, only 3 words remained legible. "Your brother, Edmund." Reverend Voss went pale. "Edmund?" Cal asked. "My brother," the vicar said. "He died 12 years ago, a fever in London." "Was he buried there?" "So we were told." The inspector looked toward the chapelyard, where the yew tree stood heavy with snow. And yet someone spoke of a burial beneath the yew. Outside, the village bell rang 11. The sound passed softly through the chapel and faded among the rafters. Eleanor shivered, though the fire had warmed the room. Inspector Cal slipped the charred paper into his notebook. "Confessions are curious things," he murmured. "They may be true, false, or arranged for the benefit of someone listening. The man beneath the yew." By noon, the snow had thinned to a silver mist. Constable Reed and 2 churchwardens cleared the ground beneath the old yew tree, working slowly, reluctantly, as if each spadeful disturbed not soil but memory. They found bones before the light failed. Not deep, wrapped in the remains of a dark coat. Beside them lay a brass seal, green with age, bearing the crest of the Voss family, a dove and a thorn. Reverend Voss sat down on a bench and covered his face. Inspector Cal knelt beside the grave. "Not 12 years in the earth," he said. The constable swallowed. "Less. Much less, perhaps 5. Elena turned sharply. "Then it cannot be Uncle Edmund." "No," Cal said, "but someone wished us to think of him." The village stirred with whispers before dusk. At the bakery and the post office beside the water pump, Edmund Voss returned from the dead in a dozen different stories. He had been ruined by debt. He had stolen church silver. He had loved a woman above his station. He had written a letter no one ever saw. That evening, Inspector Cal examined the parish chest. Reverend Voss kept the key, yet the lock bore scratches. Inside were registers, marriage licenses, burial notes, and bundles of old family correspondence tied with ribbon. One space was empty. "A letter missing?" Cal asked. The vicar's voice was faint. "My father's last letter. It named Edmund as heir to Briar House. And you inherited instead." The fire cracked behind them. Elena looked from her uncle to the inspector. "Then the confession accused you." Reverend Voss whispered, "Yes." The house with no lamps. Briar House stood at the edge of the village, shuttered and still beneath its black trees. It had once belonged to the Voss family, but Reverend Voss had sold it years before to Mrs. Lydia Crane, a widow who rarely entertained and never explained her money. Inspector Cal called after supper. Mrs. Crane received him in a drawing room lit by one lamp and a low fire. She was handsome in a severe way, with gray eyes and a voice polished by restraint. On the table beside her lay a bowl of dried lavender. "Edmund Voss was not your husband," Cal said. "No, your friend." Her fingers tightened slightly. "He was kind to me when kindness was costly." "Did he write to you?" She looked toward the dark window. "Once. With a seal bearing a dove and thorn." For the first time, her composure trembled. "He wrote that he would return," she said. "That he had proof his brother had cheated him of inheritance. He never came." "Did you believe Reverend Voss killed him?" "I believed many things in grief." Cal noticed the fireplace. Its grate had been recently cleaned, yet ash clung in one corner, fine black dust threaded with a sweet floral scent. "Lavender. Someone burned paper here," he said. Mrs. Crane stood. "Inspector, I have lived 12 years with a question. Do not accuse me of answering it too late." In the hallway, as he left, Cal saw a man's glove on the side table. It was patched at the thumb with black thread. "Does someone visit you often?" Mrs. Crane's eyes hardened. "My gardeners." The gardener's whisper. The gardener was Thomas Elwick, a stooped, soft-spoken man who lived in a cottage behind the orchard. Snow lay thick upon his roof, and lamplight shone through one small window where geraniums bloomed against the cold. He opened the door before Cal knocked. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. Inside, the cottage was warm, fragrant with peat smoke and stewed apples. A patched glove lay drying by the hearth. Its mate was in Elwick's pocket. "You were in the chapel last night," Cal said. Elwick lowered his eyes. "Yes." "You made the confession." "I spoke what should have been spoken long ago." "But not all of it." The old gardener sank into a chair. He had served at Briar House when Edmund Voss returned secretly, not 12 years ago, but 5. Edmund had come ill, desperate, and carrying his father's letter. He meant to confront Reverend Voss. Before he could, he collapsed near the chapelyard after meeting someone in the snow. "I found him beneath the yew," Elwick whispered. "Dead already, the letter gone." "Why bury him?" Mrs. Crane would have broken, and Reverend Voss, if blamed, would have ruined the parish. "I was a coward with a shovel." "And last night, I heard she meant to sell Briar House. I thought the truth should rise before she left." Cal leaned forward. "Who met Edmund?" Elwick looked into the fire. "Miss Elena." The letter in the altar cloth. Elena did not deny it. They stood in the vestry after midnight, while snow glowed blue beyond the chapel windows and the altar candles burned with steady golden flames. "I was 19, she said. "Uncle Edmund came to me because he trusted me. He showed me the letter. It proved Briar House was his. He said Reverend Voss had hidden it. And you took it. To protect my uncle. The vicar, I mean. He had raised me. I thought Edmund would destroy him. And Edmund... He followed me into the chapelyard. We argued. He was feverish. He fell." Her voice thinned. "I ran for help, but when I returned, he was gone. Elwick had buried him." She nodded, tears bright but quiet. "I hid the letter in the altar cloth. I could not burn it. I could not give it back." Inspector Cal lifted the folded cloth from the sewing basket. Along its inner hem, behind a line of red silk, lay a brittle envelope sealed with the dove and thorn. Reverend Voss entered slowly, as if age had come for him all at once. "I did cheat him," he said, "but I did not know he returned. Alina bore my sin more faithfully than I did." The chapel seemed to listen. Outside, snow slipped softly from the yew branches. When the chapel fell silent, morning came pale and gentle over Briarcombe. The storm had passed, leaving every roof, fence, and gravestone shining beneath a clean winter sky. The bones beneath the yew were named at last. Edmund Voss was buried properly 3 days later, while the village stood hushed among the snow. Reverend Voss confessed to the stolen inheritance and resigned before evening. Alina spoke to the magistrate, and Thomas Elwick gave his account with hands folded, no longer trembling. Mrs. Crane received the recovered letter in the chapel after the service. She held it for a long while, not reading, merely touching the seal with one gloved finger. "He came back," she whispered. "Yes," Inspector Cal said, "and now he has been heard." The chapel warmed slowly that afternoon. Miss Lyle from the tea rooms brought seed cake. Constable Reed laid fresh logs in the vestry grate. Even the old walls seemed less cold. Before leaving, Cal stood once more beside the confession room. No voice came through the plaster now. No whispered guilt, no borrowed accusation, no sorrow searching for an ear. Only the soft tick of melting snow. By dusk, lamps glowed in the cottages, and the chapel bell rang for evening prayer, clear and modest over the white fields. The villagers paused to listen, and for once the sound carried no warning. Only peace, arriving late, but arriving all the same. Chapter 8. The hidden motive beneath Elmsworth's perfect smile. Elmsworth woke beneath a shawl of winter mist, every roof powdered white, every garden wall softened by frost. Smoke rose from chimneys in peaceful blue threads, and the high street looked, as it always did, like a village painted by someone who believed too tenderly in goodness. At the center of it all stood Dr. Simon Merriweather. He smiled at every passerby. He tipped his hat to widows, carried parcels for old men, and remembered the names of children's dolls. His surgery windows glowed late into the evening, and no one in Elmsworth could recall him raising his voice. "He is the kindest man in England," Mrs. Pym often declared. And perhaps that was why, when he was found dead in the parish hall on the morning of the winter charity fair, no one believed it at first. He lay beside the donation table, one hand resting over his heart, his face still wearing that faint, pleasant expression by which the village had known him. Around him were baskets of oranges, knitted scarves, jars of honey, and paper garlands waiting to be hung. Inspector Lucian Vale arrived before 9, walking carefully across the frost. He was a small, precise gentleman with silver at his temples and eyes that seemed made for quiet rooms. "Heart failure?" asked Constable Hobb. "Perhaps," said Vale. He bent beside the body. On Merriweather's cuff was a smear of violet ink. Near his shoe lay a broken sugar pearl from a decorated cake, and tucked beneath the donation ledger was a folded note written in a delicate hand. A perfect smile hides the deepest wound. Inspector Vale looked around the hall, where flowers stood in vases and kindness lay arranged on tables. "How very troubling," he murmured. "A village may forgive wickedness, but it seldom forgives disappointment." The charity fair. By noon, the snow had begun again, soft and hesitant, drifting past the parish hall windows while Elmsworth gathered in uneasy clusters. The fair had been canceled, yet no one went home. Fear, like warmth, kept people close. Miss Clara Fenwick, who managed the charity accounts, sat near the stove with her gloves twisted in her lap. "Dr. Merriweather arrived early," she said. "He always did. He was to open the fair." "And you?" Vale asked. "I came at 7:30. He was already here." "Alive?" Her eyes lowered. "No." The vicar, Reverend Ashcombe, stood beside the stage, pale beneath his collar. Mrs. Pym wept into a handkerchief. Young Edward Lorne, the schoolmaster, stared at the floorboards as though reading something dreadful there. Inspector Vale opened the donation ledger. Its pages were neat, every coin accounted for. Yet one line had been scratched out so firmly that the paper had nearly torn. "Who gave £50 anonymously?" he asked. No one answered. At the back of the hall, old Mrs. Bellamy whispered, "Ask the doctor's wife." Mrs. Merriweather entered moments later, dressed in gray wool, her face composed with such care that grief seemed arranged upon it. She looked at her husband's covered body and did not cry. "My husband had no enemies," she said. "Madam," Vale replied gently, "men with no enemies are often those whose enemies are ashamed to speak." She looked at him then, and for the first time, Elmsworth's perfect smile seemed to tremble. The doctor's house. The Merriweather house stood behind the surgery, bright windowed and orderly, with holly at the door and a brass knocker polished to a mirror shine. Inside, the room smelled of lavender, coal smoke, and carbolic soap. Everything was clean. Everything was in its place. Inspector Vale stood in the study, while Mrs. Merriweather watched from the threshold. On the desk lay appointment books, medical journals, and a silver-framed photograph of the doctor smiling beside a little girl with dark curls. "Your daughter?" Vale asked. "Our niece," she said. "Anna, she died 3 winters ago." "Of illness?" "Pneumonia." The answer came too quickly. Vale examined the inkstand, violet ink, the same shade that stained the doctor's cuff. Beside it was a locked drawer. Mrs. Merriweather hesitated before producing the key. Inside lay letters tied with black ribbon. They were addressed to Dr. Merriweather, written by parents from nearby villages, thanking him for private care. Among them was a thinner envelope, unsealed, containing a list of names. Children, dates, payments. Vale's expression did not alter, but his voice softened. "What was your husband doing?" Mrs. Merriweather gripped the chair. "He helped families who could not afford specialists." "Did all the children recover?" Her silence was answer enough. From the hallway came a small sound. The maid, Elsie, stood with a coal scuttle in her hands, her face white. "He smiled when he lied," she whispered. "That was how you knew." The schoolmaster's secret. Edward Lorne lived above the schoolroom, where a small fire burned and children's copybooks were stacked beside the window. Snow tapped gently against the glass as Inspector Vale entered. "You knew about the children," Vale said. Lorne turned from the hearth. He looked young only until he spoke. "My brother was one of them. The doctor treated him." "He experimented on him," Lorne said quietly. "A tonic, he called it, imported, expensive, miraculous. My mother sold her wedding ring for it." "And your brother died?" "Yes." On the mantel stood a little tin horse, worn at the legs. Vale picked it up, then set it down with care. "Did you write the note found beneath the ledger?" "No, but you were in the hall last night." Lorne's face tightened. Vale pointed to the hearth. A scrap of blue paper lay half-burned among the ashes. Lorne closed his eyes. "I found the anonymous donation entry. £50. It was from Merriweather, blood money dressed as charity. I meant to expose him at the fair." "With what proof?" "Letters. Clara Fenwick had them." Snow pressed softly at the window. The room seemed to grow smaller. "And Dr. Merriweather?" "He came to me at dusk. He begged me not to ruin him. He said people needed belief more than truth." Lorne's voice broke, but only slightly. "I told him belief was what buried my brother." "The woman with the ledger." Clara Fenwick had served as treasurer of the parish charity for 6 years. Her cottage stood near the mill stream, warmed by a bright fire and lined with books. She received Vale with a calmness he did not trust. "You kept the letters," he said. "I copied them." "Why?" "Because originals vanish in careful houses." She took a packet from beneath a loose floorboard. Names, payments, symptoms, deaths. Each sheet was copied in her delicate hand, the same hand that had written the note found in the hall. Vale laid it on the table. A perfect smile hides the deepest wound. Clara looked at it. Yes, I wrote that. For whom? For Elmsworth. And for Dr. Merriweather. Her eyes shone in the firelight. He killed my sister's child, then stood at the funeral and spoke of God's mysterious mercy. Vale was silent for a while. Did you poison him? No. Did you wish to? Yes. The honesty was so gentle it seemed almost prayerful. She explained that she had arranged to confront him at dawn, before the fair opened. She left the copied letters in the hall beside the donation ledger, but when she arrived, he was already dead and the letters were gone. Who else knew? Vale asked. Clara looked toward the window, where the millstream moved beneath a skin of ice. His wife. The smile breaks. They gathered that evening in the Merriweather drawing room. Snow thickened outside, muffling the village until only the fire and the clock seemed alive. Mrs. Merriweather sat upright in gray, her hands folded. Inspector Vale placed the copied letters on the table. Your husband's crimes were not murder in the simple sense, he said. They were worse in one respect. They were slow, respectable, smiling. Mrs. Merriweather closed her eyes. He believed in his tonic, she whispered. At first, perhaps. At first, she agreed. Then he believed in being beloved. Vale took a small paper packet from his pocket. This was found in the surgery waste bin, powdered foxglove, used carefully, medicine, used otherwise. The clock ticked. Constable Hobbs shifted uneasily. Then she killed him. Vale looked not at Mrs. Merriweather, but at Elsie the maid standing by the door. No, she meant to. Elsie began to tremble. Mrs. Merriweather put the powder in his morning cordial, Vale said. But before he drank it, Elsie came into the hall. She had lost a sister's child too, though no one in this house remembered servants' grief. She saw the doctor tear up Clara's letters. She saw him smiling. Elsie covered her mouth. You struck the glass from his hand, Vale continued. It shattered. One sugar pearl from the cake table stuck to his shoe. Then he collapsed not from poison but from fear and a failing heart. You thought you had killed him. Mrs. Merriweather opened her eyes, and I thought I had. Two women looked at one another across the firelight, bound by guilt, divided by class, joined by the dead. The village without a smile. By morning, Elmsworth lay white and still beneath a clear winter sky. The bells did not ring, but people came quietly to the parish hall, bringing the charity baskets inside before the fruit froze. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It settled slowly like snow. Dr. Merriweather's records were sent to the county authorities. Clara Fenwick's copies became evidence. Mrs. Merriweather confessed to attempted poisoning, though death had reached her husband by another road. Elsie gave her statement with trembling hands and was not led away. Edward Lorne reopened the school 2 days later. On each desk, he placed an orange from the canceled fair. The children peeled them carefully, filling the room with bright, clean sweetness. Inspector Vale left Elmsworth at dusk. Mrs. Pym met him near the bakery, her face lined with sorrow. We all loved him, she said. Yes, Vale replied. Were we fools? He looked down the high street, where warm lamps glowed behind frosted panes, and smoke rose gently into the evening. No, he said, you were lonely for goodness. That is not foolish, only dangerous when goodness wears a mask. As night gathered, Elmsworth grew quiet, curtains closed, fires were stirred. The village no longer seemed perfect, but perhaps it had become kinder in a truer way. And beneath the snow, where footprints had crossed and recrossed the parish path, the hidden motive lay uncovered at last. Not hatred, not greed, but grief, waiting patiently behind a perfect smile. Chapter 9. Candles in the assembly hall and the killer unmasked. Snow fell over Elmsworth as though the heavens had chosen to speak in whispers. By dusk, the roofs were sugared white. The lanes lay muffled beneath a soft crust, and every window along the high street glowed with the golden promise of the winter assembly. The assembly hall stood beside the church, broad-windowed and warm, its doors wreathed in holly, its floor swept bright for dancing. Inside, candles stood in rows upon the mantelpieces, along the supper tables and in silver branches beneath the portraits of forgotten mayors. Their flames trembled whenever the door opened, making every face appear briefly unfamiliar. Inspector Lucian Vale watched from near the punch bowl. He had been invited not as an officer but as a guest. Still, habit made him observe. Mrs. Pym wore mourning pearls with a green ribbon. Reverend Ashcombe smiled too readily. Miss Clara Fenwick kept glancing toward the stage curtain, and Mr. Edwin Lorne, the schoolmaster, stood alone beneath the clock, turning his gloves slowly in his hands. At 9, the musicians began a waltz. At 10, the candles near the stage guttered. At 10 past, the hall went dark. A gasp passed through the room, then silence, deep and absolute. Someone dropped a glass. Somewhere, silk rustled. The darkness lasted no more than 30 seconds. When the flames were restored, Alderman Silas Braith lay on the stage steps, one hand clutching his waistcoat, his white shirt stained crimson beneath a folded paper heart pinned to his lapel. On it, written in violet ink, were 5 words. The final mask is kindness. The paper heart. No one was permitted to leave. The snow outside thickened against the windows, erasing the village beyond the glass. Within the assembly hall, the candles burned lower, smaller, more watchful. The body of Alderman Braith was carried behind a screen, and the guests gathered in murmuring clusters, pale beneath garlands and candle smoke. Inspector Vale stood beside the stage steps. "A knife?" asked Constable Hobb. "A very narrow blade," Vale replied. "Used close, used calmly." The constable swallowed. "In the dark." "No, darkness is useful for panic. Murder prefers preparation." Vale examined the paper heart. It had been cut from thick cream stationery, the edges smooth, the fold precise. Violet ink again. The pin that held it was not a common sewing pin, but a hat pin, tipped with a pearl no larger than a frozen tear. "Who arranged the decorations?" he asked. Miss Clara Fenwick stepped forward. "I did." "And the paper hearts?" "For the charity game, each guest received one." "Not like this," Mrs. Pym whispered. "Ours were red." Vale looked toward the stage curtain. Its lower hem was torn, and a thread of black velvet clung to the nail beside the step. Nearby, on the polished floor, lay a small crescent of candle wax, darkened by soot. Alderman Braith had been popular in the way powerful men are popular, loudly praised, quietly feared. He gave generously to public causes, spoke warmly at funerals, and signed eviction notices with a steady hand. "Who last spoke with him?" Vale asked. The room turned, almost as one, toward Mrs. Beatrice Braith. "The widow in pearls." Mrs. Braith sat in the little retiring room behind the hall, where a coal fire burned, and the walls smelled faintly of damp wool and orange pomander. She was dressed in ivory silk, with pearls at her throat, and a face composed with dreadful discipline. "My husband had enemies," she said before Vale asked. "That is refreshingly direct. He enjoyed being forgiven more than being good." Vale sat opposite her. "Did you forgive him?" She smiled faintly. "Repeatedly, it was my duty." On the side table lay a mask of white satin trimmed with silver lace, part of the evening's masquerade amusement. Vale lifted it. "You wore this?" "Until supper. There is soot on the edge." The candles smoked terribly near the stage. "And blood beneath the ribbon." Her eyes flickered. A thread of silence stretched between them, thin as wire. "I went to him before the dance," she said. "He had received a letter. It disturbed him." "From whom?" "I did not see." "Did he seem afraid?" "At last," she whispered. Vale studied her hands. No tremor, no stain, yet on her right glove near the cuff was a faint violet smudge. "You use violet ink?" "No. Someone near you does." She looked toward the closed door. "Miss Fenwick keeps the charity accounts in violet ink, but she is not the only woman in Elmsworth with reason to hate Silas Braith." "Who else?" Mrs. Braith turned her face toward the fire. "Ask the young man whose father died in debt." The schoolmaster's gloves. Edward Lorne stood alone in the cloakroom, where rows of coats hung heavy with snowmelt and the air smelled of wool, leather, and extinguished candles. He did not seem surprised when Vale entered. "You think I killed him?" Lorne said. "I think grief has sharp hands." The schoolmaster laughed once softly without amusement. "Braith owned my father's debt. He took our house, our books, even my mother's piano. Then he funded the school roof and let the village call him noble." "Did you threaten him?" "I promised to expose him." "With what?" Lorne removed a folded document from his coat. Proof that he stole relief funds after the mill fire, money meant for widows. Vale read by candlelight. The signatures were clear. Braith's was among them. "Where did you get this?" "From Miss Fenwick. She found it in old parish papers." "And tonight?" "I plan to read it from the stage." "But Braith died first." "Yes." Vale looked at Lorne's gloves. The right one was torn at the palm, not fresh. Beneath the tear was a thin scratch. "Did you struggle with him?" "No, with the curtain rope." "The darkness." Lorne lowered his gaze. "I pulled the side curtain to signal Clara. The candle branch tipped. Flames went out. I did not mean for the whole hall to fall dark." "Convenient accident." "Terrible accident." Vale believed him, which was not the same as clearing him. From behind the coats came a sound, the faintest chime of metal against wood. Vale parted the cloaks and found, caught on a peg, a black velvet mask with one silver thread torn loose. The mask beneath the stage. The stage had been built over an old storage hollow, reachable by a narrow door behind the supper table. Vale descended with Constable Hobb carrying a lantern. Beneath the floor, the air was cold and close, scented with dust, candle grease, and old timber. There, arranged with care, they found a discarded cloak, a small theater dagger wrapped in linen, and a bottle of violet ink. "Then Miss Fenwick," Hobb breathed. "Too simple." Vale lifted the dagger. Its blade was clean. "Stage prop," he said, "meant to be found, a thoughtful lie." Behind a stack of chairs, he noticed dripped wax on the floorboards, not in a random splash, but in a line leading to the narrow gap beneath the stage steps. A candle had been placed there earlier, its flame positioned to burn through a thread. "When the thread broke," Vale murmured, "a weight fell, the curtain shifted, the candles guttered, and darkness arrived precisely on cue." "But who said it?" "Someone familiar with the hall, someone patient." He returned upstairs and asked for the hall caretaker, Mr. Abel Crow. Crow was elderly, stooped, and gentle-eyed. He had lit every candle that evening. He knew every draft, every latch, every groan of the old floor. When Vale mentioned the thread, Crow closed his eyes. "I only meant to frighten him," he said. The killer unmasked. They gathered before midnight beneath the chandeliers, which now held only half their candles. The guests stood in a crescent facing the stage. Outside, snow tapped gently at the windows as if the village itself wished to hear. Inspector Vale held up the paper heart. This murder was dressed as theater. The darkness, the message, the hidden dagger, the ink, all designed to accuse the angry, the grieving, the inconvenient. Clara Fenwick's face was pale. Edward Lorne stood beside her. Mrs. Braith sat very still. "Mr. Crow arranged the darkness," Vale continued, "but not the death. He intended only to expose Alderman Braith during the charity game. Years ago, his daughter died after the mill fire, waiting for relief money that never came. Braith had stolen it." Crow bowed his head. Miss Fenwick had the documents. Mr. Lorne meant to speak. Mrs. Braith knew her husband was afraid, yet the fatal hand belonged to someone who moved close without suspicion. Vale turned to Mrs. Pym. The baker's widow gave a tiny sound. "Madam," he said gently, "you pinned flowers and paper hearts on arriving guests." Her eyes filled at once, not with surprise, but with exhaustion. "My son died in that fire," she whispered. "Braith shook my hand at the funeral. He paid for the coffin with stolen money. The pearl hatpin was yours. You pinned the false heart to his lapel. When the hall went dark, you stepped near as if frightened and drove the pin into his heart, a narrow blade hidden in kindness." Mrs. Pym touched the morning pearls at her throat. "He smiled," she said. "Even when I said my son's name, he smiled." No one moved as Constable Hobb approached her. She offered her wrists without protest, small and flower pale in the candlelight. When the last candle burned, by dawn the snow had ceased. Elmsworth lay hushed beneath a clear winter morning, every roof and branch edged with silver. The assembly hall smelled of smoke, melted wax, and dying flowers. The papers proving Braith's theft were sent to the county authorities. His public statue, proposed only the week before, was quietly forgotten. Mrs. Pym confessed without embellishment. Mr. Crow, Miss Fenwick, and Edward Lorne each told their part not proudly, but with the strange relief of people who had finally set down a weight. Inspector Vale stood alone in the hall as the last candle burned low on the mantel. Mrs. Braith approached, wrapped in a dark shawl. "Was he murdered for money?" she asked. "No. For revenge. In part. For justice." Vale watched the flame shiver, recover, and sink again. Justice does not wear a hatpin in the dark, but grief sometimes borrows its name. She nodded, and for the first time her perfect composure broke. Not loudly, only a single tear, bright as candle wax, moving down her cheek. Outside, the village began to wake. Shutters opened, footsteps softened the snow, somewhere a kettle sang. When the last flame went out, the hall did not seem darker. Morning had already entered, pale and honest, through every window. Chapter 10. Winter rain over Elmsworth, and the silence that remained. Winter rain came to Elmsworth after midnight, soft at first, then steady, drawing silver lines down every window and turning the snow in the lanes to pale, shining slush. The village slept beneath it, roofs dripping, chimneys breathing, the church spire blurred behind mist. In the parlor of the Hare and Lantern, Inspector Lucian Vale sat beside the last red glow of the fire. His gloves lay folded on his knee, his tea untouched. Across from him, Mrs. Pym's empty chair seemed smaller than it had the day before. No one spoke of her loudly. By dawn, rainwater ran along the cobblestones and gathered beneath the assembly hall steps, where the last traces of candle wax had softened and spread like old tears. Alderman Braith was dead. Mrs. Pym had confessed. The stolen relief money had been named. Justice, or something close to it, had entered the village. Yet Elmsworth did not feel lighter. At 7, Constable Hobb came in, removing his wet cap. "There is another note," he said. Vale looked up. It had been found beneath the church door, folded once, dry despite the rain. On cream paper in violet ink were 6 words. "Some sins survive the guilty dead." Inspector Vale read it twice, then looked toward the window, where rain tapped patiently on the glass. "How impolite of the truth," he murmured, "to remain after the ending." The note beneath the church door. St. Bartholomew smelled of damp stone, beeswax, and extinguished candles. Rain whispered against the stained glass, making the saints appear to weep in colored shadows. Reverend Ashcombe waited near the font, pale and sleepless, while Constable Hobb held the folded note as though it might burn him. "I found it when I opened for morning prayer," the Reverend said. "Was the door locked?" Vale asked. "Yes." Then the note was slipped beneath it. Vale knelt. Mud marked the stone just inside the threshold, 2 narrow prints, one clear, one smeared. Not a man's boot, a woman's shoe, small, with a crescent nick in the heel. "Mrs. Pym is in custody," Hobb said. "Indeed, which suggests either she has learned to walk through walls, or someone else writes in violet ink." The vicar flinched at the color. In the vestry, Vale examined the church correspondence. Parish notices, charity receipts, condolence letters. The same violet ink appeared often, flowing from the pen of Miss Clara Fenwick, treasurer and keeper of all careful records. "She has used it for years," said Ashcombe. "Then it is useful to anyone wishing her shadow to fall in the right place." On the altar lay a basket of damp lilies sent for the dead. Beneath their stems, Vale found a scrap of gray wool caught on a thorn. He slipped it into his notebook. Outside, through the rain-streaked glass, Clara Fenwick stood in the churchyard without an umbrella, watching the closed door as if afraid of what might come out. The woman who kept records. Clara Fenwick's cottage was warm with coal fire and tea steam. Rain slid down the panes, blurring the millstream beyond the garden. On her table lay the copied evidence against Braith, tied with ribbon, neat as a schoolgirl's exercise. "I did not write the note," she said before Vale had removed his coat. "No, I know how it looks." "Do you?" Her face tightened. "Violet ink, a sentence like judgment, everyone will think it mine." Vale sat by the fire. "And is there more judgment to come?" Clara looked at the documents. The relief fund theft was larger than Braith. He signed the papers, yes, but he was not clever enough to hide the rest. Who was? She hesitated. Rain tapped steadily. The cottage clock gave a small, uncertain tick. The parish accounts passed through Reverend Ashcombe, she said at last, and through Mr. Abel Crow when the hall was rebuilt. Mrs. Pym's son was not the only one who died after the mill fire. Money disappeared while families waited. Why not tell me? Because yesterday one truth destroyed a woman already ruined by grief. I feared what another might do. Vale regarded her gently. Truth is not kind because we delay it. From beneath the ribbon papers, Clara drew out a ledger page. 3 initials appeared again and again beside missing sums. SBACRA. Silas Braith, Abel Crow, Reverend Ashcombe. At the bottom, written later in a different hand, was one final name, EP. Vale lifted his eyes. Edward Pym, Clara whispered, Mrs. Pym's dead son. The boy who did not die at once. The rain eased toward afternoon, leaving Elmsworth wrapped in a gray hush. Inspector Vale walked to the old mill ruins, where the river moved swollen and brown beneath the broken wheel. Here, 5 winters before, fire had eaten the workroom and smoke had driven men into the freezing yard. Mrs. Pym had always said her boy died quickly. But records did not. At the surgery, Vale found the old death notes in a cabinet that smelled of dust and carbolic. Dr. Merriweather's elegant hand recorded the injuries, burns, smoke in the lungs, but alive when carried to the parish hall. Alive for 6 hours. 6 hours, Hobb whispered. Long enough to speak. They found Miss Elsie, the former surgery maid, folding linens by the kitchen stove. She had aged visibly since the doctor's disgrace, though only weeks had passed in the hearts of the villagers. Edward Pym said something, Vale said. Elsie's hand stopped. He was feverish, she whispered. He kept saying they locked the back door. Who? I told the doctor. He told me grief makes nonsense. Did Mrs. Pym know? Elsie shook her head. No, but someone did. Someone came that night to the hall, a man in a gray coat. He stood by the boy's cot, and when he left, Edward was quiet. Dead. She closed her eyes. Silent. Vale took the gray wool scrap from his notebook. Elsie stared at it. Mr. Crow wore a coat like that, she said. Always, even indoors. The caretaker's fire. Abel Crow lived behind the assembly hall in 2 low rooms warmed by a black iron stove. Rain ticked from the eaves, and the smell of damp wood filled the narrow space. He opened the door slowly, as if he had expected Vale all day. You have come about the note, he said. I have come about the silence. Crow's face folded in pain. On a chair near the stove lay a gray wool coat, its hem torn. Vale placed the scrap against it. The match was exact. You slipped the note beneath the church door, Vale said. Crow nodded. Why? Because Mrs. Pym killed the wrong man. The stove sighed. Rain moved softly in the gutter. Crow told it without drama. The night of the mill fire, Braith and Reverend Ashcombe had ordered the back door chained to prevent theft during unrest among workers. Crow, then hall caretaker and occasional mill watchman had carried out the order. When the fire came, the chain held. Men escaped through broken windows. Edward Pym, small and frightened, did not. He lived long enough to tell me, Crow whispered. I stood beside his cot and begged him not to speak. I told myself he was dying anyway. And then, I pressed the pillow down. The room grew very quiet. Vale looked at him with sorrow rather than surprise. You helped expose Braith to ease your conscience. I wanted punishment, not for myself, never for myself. Cowards prefer other men's gallows. Why write the note now? Because Mrs. Pym looked at me when they took her away. She thanked me for helping uncover the truth. His voice broke. And I let her. The silence that remained. Reverend Ashcombe confessed before evening prayer. Not to murder, but to the chain, the money, and the lie that followed. Abel Crow confessed to Edward Pym's death in a voice so low the constable had to lean close to hear it. By nightfall, Elmsworth knew. No bell rang, no crowd formed. The village received the truth as one receives winter rain, reluctantly, helplessly, knowing it will find every crack in the roof. Mrs. Pym was told in the county holding room. She sat for a long while with her hands folded, flour still settled in the lines of her fingers. At last she said only, "Then my boy was afraid." Inspector Vale did not answer. There are griefs that make replies indecent. 2 days later, the rain stopped. Elmsworth emerged beneath a pale, washed sky. Snow had vanished from the lanes, leaving cobbles dark and clean. The assembly hall remained locked. The church door stood open. In the bakery window, for the first time in memory, no bread was set out before dawn. Clara Fenwick placed Edward Pym's name in the parish record properly, with the hour of his death corrected, and the cause no longer softened by polite ink. Inspector Vale left before sunset. At the bridge, he paused and looked back at the village. Smoke rose, lamps glowed. Life, stubborn and tender, had begun again. Yet some silence remained. Not the silence of secrets, that had been broken. This was the quieter silence that follows truth, when everyone has heard enough to change, and no one yet knows how to speak.